you never know that you're going to be the first.
You were the first woman ever to get into PricewaterhouseCoopers. You were the first woman to head FICCI, and you were the first woman to head a foreign bank in India.
And it's a very sad social comment, if you think about it, because men had been going for a couple of decades.
Right.
Women were more than welcome at the business school. The issue was really more our social systems back home, because I know how I had to struggle and fight my way through the family. They have no business to be interfering in my career. And I'm so glad that they did that, because it made me so angry that I decided I was just going to show them. I didn't think people could hold me back because I was a woman, but I had no doubt that I was being watched all the time. I was a curiosity. Who is this person? And if I sensed that they were resisting it in some way, I wasn't going to take that, because, I could bang the table as hard as anyone else if required. I think always better prepared than my colleagues, because I didn't dare take a chance, because I felt that if I failed, not only was I going to fail, but all of womankind would fail.
Just the day before the bank CEO called to offer you the job, you realized you were pregnant.
So Bob Edgar calls me in and makes this offer. I think I want to do the job, but you should know I'm pregnant. He went into silence for like 5 minutes, turned back to me and said, "What would you like to do?" And when I said I'd like to take the job, that faith was really serious. It was a real leap of faith on his part.
Right.
So I really believed I had to show him that faith was well placed.
During the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, 32 of your colleagues were trapped inside the Taj in the Oberoi.
It was the most frightening time. I was way out of my depth. I mean, I'm the CEO of the bank. I've not been trained to take these decisions, and I'm having to take life and death decisions for people, because calls that were coming on the hotline was scary. I hear gunshots. Should I make a run for it?
Calling you from the hotel phone.
From their
mobiles.
hotel phone. How do you take decisions in a scenario like this when ultimately everybody around you has a view and it's not a consensus? You have to be there, sometimes sounding more confident than you are.
Yes.
So it was a nightmare.
What did success take away from you that you did not anticipate?
I didn't think I would lose.
My guest today is Naina Lal Kidwai. She built Morgan Stanley's India operations, was CEO and Chairman of HSBC India, sits on several global boards, and has advised everyone from SEBI to the Prime Minister's office. But this conversation isn't about the resume. I wanted to understand how one person achieves this much in a single lifetime. What's the mindset? What are the decisions that most people never see? And what does it take to keep going when you're the first woman in every room you walk into? Let's just pause. Subscribing here isn't just about supporting our channel. It's about choosing what kind of thinking you want around you regularly. So if that resonates, you know what to do. Naina, I've met you so many times, socially mostly, and I know from your reputation that you are a very accomplished individual banker and woman, but I really had no idea that you have so many firsts to your name. You were the first Indian woman to get into Harvard Business School. You were the first woman ever to get into PricewaterhouseCoopers. You were the first woman to head FICCI. And you were the first woman to head a foreign bank in India. So, I mean, that's just mind-boggling for me, honestly. And the other thing that's so interesting is that every time I've met you, you seem to be such a balanced, quiet human being. So I really want to unpack, beneath this veneer of calm, this steely person that lies underneath, with this steely determination to break all these barriers. That's what I'd really like to do today. So let's start with, you were 23. And you applied to Harvard Business School. You were the youngest person in the class. And did you know you're going to be the first Indian woman?
You never know that you're going to be the first till someone tells you. And that's exactly what happened. A month into business school, I got a call from the office and I was like, oh my God, maybe the fees haven't been remitted. There's some issue. I go there and they say, they're standing there with a letter, which was a little token, and they actually gave me money, which I
Right.
wasn't like, it was 2 semester fees.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot of money as an award unapplied for. I mean, that's how generous the school is. Basically, to tell me that I was the first Indian woman at the school. And it's a very sad social comment,
Yeah.
if you think about it, because men had been going for a couple of decades.
Right.
Women were more than welcome at the business school. The issue was really more our social systems back home, because I know how I had to struggle and fight my way through the family
Yeah.
to make sure that they even allowed me to go.
And when you say struggle, can you just take us through that? You were at Lady Shriram before.
So I was doing my accountancy degree,
Right.
and as is the case with a chartered accounting degree, at that time you had to finish 3 years of training, articleship, before you could give the final exam. And I had finished my intermediate. I was just literally hanging around, ticking ledgers as an auditor at the firm, waiting to give my final. So I thought, why not apply off to business school? Which was, by the way, something I'd always wanted to do, go abroad to do an MBA. And began to apply, and never for the life of me thinking I would get in. But I thought, let's give it a shot. Let's see what kind of school I wind up in. Dad was very clear, very good idea, do your MBA, but I'm only going to pay for it if you get into the top 4 or 5 schools.
Got it.
So sort of cleared the names and applied, really not knowing whether I would get in. So my surprise was the fact that I had gotten in. Yeah. And when I did, why was it a struggle? So the struggle really was having gotten in. My father was like, but you haven't finished your articles. So I said, no, I'll finish my articles, but I won't have time to give the final exam because I'm going in September. The earliest I'm eligible to do the finals is November. And I have no idea how. Those days we were all on slow mail. There was no fancy phones and systems that you could speak to the school. So I don't want to give this opportunity up. My closest friend from school at the time, Meera Nair, had applied out to the undergrad school
I see.
at Harvard and had gone. And much to my dismay, had not finished her 3 years at Miranda House.
Right.
But she was so clear she wanted to go. And I really admire her for her clarity of decision making. 2 years after her bachelor's degree at Miranda, she pushed off because she got in and just never finished her degree here. And I was like, why won't you finish it for 1 more year? But again, this whole thing of how do you get a deferred admit like you get
Right.
now?
Right.
This whole process was just so difficult sitting in
opaque.
India. And yeah, but we didn't even know how to do it.
Yes.
So having seen her decision making, seen that how much she had enjoyed being there, so at least it opened my eyes to what being in Boston was about. But I had never visited the US before I went for the MBA, so I didn't know what the US was like.
Right.
And as luck would have it, after I got into my MBA, I bumped into Anand Mahindra's mom. And she was like, oh, you're going off to Harvard when my son is there. And, that then clicked in and, okay, there are people who I might know
Right.
who are there. But I had no idea, really. So my mom suddenly was, having a heart attack about, you're so young and sending you off. Are you sure that's the right thing? Dad was clear, but he was stressed because I hadn't finished my chartered accountancy till I assured him I would finish it. And that is a promise I never lived up to, sadly. He was very upset with me about that. And then I had this, uncles, basically, my mother's brothers, etc., who actually weren't even funding my degree, and they had really no business to interfere, but all decided to have an opinion about how I should not be sent off to the US. It was a waste of money, and I should just be kept here and married off, and this was not the pathway for girls. And I'm so glad that they did that, because it made me so angry that I decided I was just going to show them. And the show them was going to be about a career outside of the family business, because they were at various stages, there were enticements put my way to join the family business. And I was like, after all that, when these guys getting in the way, I'm going to show them I don't need them. They have no business to be interfering in my career. And go, I will, and show them what I can do. So my resolve very clear. My father always behind me. Mom also totally behind me, except she vacillated through these influences. And off I went. And at that time, the whole prospect of a journey back to India was very expensive and very long. So when I went, I knew I wasn't going to be back for 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And
Wow.
I was really lucky they even came for my graduation.
And no telephone calls.
So the telephone calls were, every 3 minutes the operator would come on the line saying, extend, and you know that they were listening in, and it was all very rushed. And there was no way I could pay for the call from there because we used to go on this stringent budget that the Reserve Bank of India would clear. So there was a system I'd established by which we would do a collect call to the parents, and then they would therefore
Collect
pay.
calls, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So it was all, all had to be managed in a way which was really very painful. And then I never visited the US, so I didn't even know what I was in for there. My first trip to a supermarket was an experience in itself. Luckily, I had this concept of a study group. So there were 2 Texans and an American girl. So 4 of us were forced into these study groups. And they were like, we're going shopping. You want to come? So off I went to the supermarket with them, and with no experience of shopping in a supermarket. We didn't have supermarkets in India. And then 8 varieties of ketchup and 20 varieties of jam. How do you buy? How do you compare prices?
Yes.
I was not even 5 inches into the first aisle. They had finished shopping.
Right.
So I had my whole study group teaching me how to shop in a supermarket, an experience they will not forget because for them it was second nature. And likewise, learnt what it was to work an ATM. ATMs had just arrived in the US. We didn't know what ATMs were. I
with
didn't
a card, keeping a card with you.
Or the fact that they call them drugstores, but actually you could buy Coca-Cola and chips there rather than medicines, because it wasn't a pharmacy, which is what they called where you got your medicines. So it was a huge new learning, what being in the US was about. But the great thing was I was there with a bunch of people who became close friends, guiding me through it, but no family. And it was one of the most amazing experiences ever.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And just one last thing I wanted to ask you there, because things are dangled in front of everyone to do and not do. But I find it very interesting that you use that word anger, because, people have different feelings. So just wanted to go a little deeper into that for a minute, and how, when you said you were angry and it spurred you on, like how did you show your anger? Like what did you do?
Yeah, I think it's a very positive sentiment if you can do something about it.
Right.
And I recognized very early that how it had helped me make up my mind. Because even if I was vacillating, because after all, someone's saying go a year later, dad is saying finish your chartered accountancy, then go, I'm letting him down, all of those thoughts. But when this happened, it was like, I'm going to show them.
Right.
And right through life, I think whenever I was frustrated and angry, sometimes you just decide to stick it out and pick your moment. But I think it's such a fabulous feeling because it makes you alive.
It really wakes you up. It really lights a fire.
And it makes you think,
Yeah.
What is it that I need to do about this, and how can I solve for it? So therefore I often say I'm really grateful that I had these hurdles in the way, which only strengthened my resolve further. I think the other energy but that I learned quite early in school, was a competitiveness and ambition. And that needed to be managed. And my father was very quick to pick that up, because if I didn't come first in class, I was like sobbing, crying, withdrawing into my, just really, really messed up.
Right.
And so my father had one question always: did you do your best? If you didn't do your best, you have every reason to feel the way you are and do something about it. But if you did your best and the outcome is that you've come second or third in class, it's not something that you should be upset about, because he really taught me to not compete against others, but to compete against myself. And I think it was a very important check and balance he brought in, because my desire to be first was so strong that I could have well been driven to behaving in ways which were not appropriate and would have made me unpopular in class, etc. Whereas here it was all about, hey, you have to now know that if you haven't done your best, what could you have done differently? What could you have done better? And I think that spirit of competition always remained. I played a lot of sports in school, etc. I was in the school basketball team, badminton team. So the desire to win was very strong. But how to manage that failure when you lost?
And how can you tell us how teach all of us, how do you do that?
I think
to compete with yourself.
So you analyze what you haven't done right, what failed. And I learned to do this even with our basketball team. We would sort of convene at the end of it and actually discuss what we could have done differently, who didn't pass to who was playing in there for themselves rather than as a team. In badminton, similarly.
A solid post-mortem.
Which
most people don't do, right? You're just like,
it
happened, and you just throw it out and you're like, whatever, I'll try better. It means it gets lost in a haze of emotion.
Absolutely. And the learning after. I mean, I remember going back to a teacher in school, ask, because I couldn't figure out what I could have done better, to ask. And that was at my father's prompting. And that I learned later that it was very easy to do. The teachers respected the fact that I came. I took those lessons back. And, even if a bit teary. It was, I think failure is a given. I mean, we've all, fall flat on our faces at different stages in life. How we deal with that failure is so critical. And if we don't learn, then we are doomed to failure again and again. And in this environment now, this whole AI environment, things changing as quickly as they do, if you are the kind of person who can't learn from failure and pick yourself up, or you're working in an environment which doesn't recognize that failure is a given, then you're doomed to failure.
I think that's honestly, I mean, everybody, we all say, like in a pithy way almost, learn from failure.
Yeah.
But
how?
At a young age, because I know that now, of course, I learn from failure and I analyze things. But when I was 20 or in school, there's no way I'm going to analyze anything.
Yeah.
But so to learn that at a young age, that just spend a little bit of time looking at what happened and piecing it again together, which is when you'll get a picture of what happened.
Yeah. But having said that, I don't know if I really learned. If I had been disappointed, for example, if I didn't make school captain, probably less of an issue in college when I stood for president, because I felt like such an outlier there. I didn't think I would actually make president, but because it's a whole election, etc. But if I hadn't made school captain, I'd have been, I don't know if I would have been a happy person that year in school, which is bad.
Right.
So you're setting yourself a target and then make yourself miserable because you don't go where you want to go. So I think ambition in itself is good. It drives you. It's good that you compete against yourself, but it shouldn't be something that makes you miserable.
And everyone shines over time.
Yeah.
Over like the 10 years, if everyone's doing it, then it comes out.
Correct.
You just get relaxed into it.
And then you see that others are doing it. So if they can do it, why can't I? And so it's a little bit of that influence.
Back to your firsts. You applied for PwC in India, and they had never hired a woman before.
Yeah.
What is going on in your head?
So I had by then more or less decided I want to go for this MBA abroad. And I was like having to show that I had work experience. And I wanted to be able to show a brand that they recognized.
One of the big five.
Yeah. Whereas we didn't have any of these big fives in India at the time. So they interviewed me very dutifully because they'd been pushed to do it. I was wondering why it took so long to get that interview. And then they said, you've got all the credentials, you've got the grades, but we don't hire women. And so my chance to be horrified. And
surprise,
I was like,
surprise.
like, why not? Oh, we do factory audit. You have to go spend 2 months in some place like Shikohabad, which is in the middle of Uttar Pradesh. And we don't know how we could do that. So I was like, I don't have a problem. And, it's a factory premise. You're staying in the plant guest house. So why is it an issue? And I mean, there are women there. All the managers have their families there.
Right.
So why would that be an issue? And they were like, oh, we just haven't done it. We don't know how we would handle it. So they were wrestling with issues.
Right.
And I have to say, with a little pushing,
Right.
because I would keep in touch and keep sort of asking. A couple of months later, they told me that I'd gotten in, and they made a brilliant decision, which was they took 3 women. So obviously they had been getting applications from women, had just been rejecting them. And so now there were 3 of us. And so when we went to Shikohabad, they put the 2 women or the 3 women into the audit together. So, there was that comfort factor.
Right.
And the guy who made that decision, Amol Ganguly, who was head of in the North India office of Pricewaterhouse at the time, he went on to then head Pricewaterhouse in the country, always told me that journey was one he never looked back on, because within 10 years, they were at a 50-50 mix of men and women.
Wow.
And it opened up that whole space for the firm. And in fact, he even said that there were times when, to keep that 50-50 mix, they were having to say no to the women because they had more capable women applying to them than they could even accommodate. Yeah. So look how quickly it can turn if people open their eyes to what's happening and should be happening. Yeah. But it did teach me early that it helps sometimes to persist, not give up.
So when you were, as you continuously broke glass ceilings, in corporate India, like in senior financial positions and in board meetings, you were the only woman in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
How did you feel? Because you were competitive, but what did you feel as a woman, being the only woman there?
The first 2-3 years were the hardest,
Of course.
because you're young, you're at the junior most sort of rung. Fortunately for me, I was in investment banking by choice. And in investment banking, you sort of sink or swim, you stand out or don't, depending on the deal you're on. So if you've succeeded in doing
It's
a
very
deal,
performance-oriented.
it's very performance-oriented. So that was very helpful, because I reached a stage where the firm couldn't ignore me. And I was confident enough in my ability. And the friendships I struck with my colleagues around me knew I had their support. They wanted me in their teams. So that all helped.
Got it.
I can't say it was difficult thereafter. After I took over as head of the North India investment bank for Grindlays, I was now heading the team. It didn't matter. And I'd also set my sights by then on heading the investment bank for Grindlays.
Amazing.
And this was going to be the launch pad. And after that, there was no looking back, because I was as an investment banker, you tend to be in quite a public face as well. You do IPOs, you're in front of media, you're handling clients, customers. So all of that really helped. So I can't say I felt that I was a woman in that role. I just had to be a good investment banker. And I think lucky for me that it came early. So by 1988-89, when I took over as head of the investment bank for Grindlays, I was well on the path to just competing with others, my colleagues around.
Right. You've said that you felt under a magnifying glass.
Yeah.
And from your book, you said every false step could be used as an advantage by others.
Yeah.
What were you referring to when you said that?
That I had no doubt that I didn't think people could hold me back because I was a woman, but I had no doubt that I was being watched all the time. I was a curiosity in the room. And who is this person?
This young
within
woman.
the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, people would forget that because, I could bang the table as hard as anyone else if required. And if I sensed that they were resisting it in some way, I wasn't going to take that.
So that would be great to understand. How did you deal with that in a room full of men, basically?
Yeah, but it was that same thing that happened to me with the uncles.
Right.
It was like, I'll show them.
You'll show them.
So
right.
You're conscious of being a woman only from the standpoint of, and you could be a guy who someone's not taking seriously. It would be the same feeling that I'm not going to be cowed down by their perception.
Right.
But therefore, I prepped. I never took a meeting for granted. I was, I think, always better prepared than my colleagues because I didn't dare take a chance because I felt that if I failed,
Hmm.
not only was I going to fail, but all of womankind would fail.
Yes.
That I couldn't be seen as falling away
Hmm.
for this. And so that was the pressure. The pressure was to make sure you got it right, that you couldn't risk it going wrong
You were
because you were being
representing
watched.
50% of humanity.
Well, I mean, there was a feeling that if I fail, is that next woman going to be admitted
Yes.
into the forum?
Yes.
Is she going to succeed? There was. I was very conscious of that. And it was in every way. I mean, the amount of thought, I don't think any guy gives so much thought to how he dresses for his
Yes.
in office. But now, what was I going to wear?
Hmm.
I hadn't worn a sari in my life.
Hmm.
And now suddenly I'm in a work environment in India in 1982. And my wardrobe is made up of, trousers and
Yes.
so on. And now what that's inappropriate. So was it going to be a trouser suit or was it going to be a sari? So I just saw Indira Gandhi there, Prime Minister. There were a couple of senior lawyers who were very visible and everyone was in saris. And I just opted for a sari. So that first meeting I went, I must have had 25 safety pins in my sari. I was more worried about poking myself than about what I was saying in that meeting. But hence the decision. And then of course, 6 days a week, I was in saris and
you became
working.
comfortable wearing saris?
Oh, yeah,
it's tough
very
also,
quickly.
no?
No, it's very easy once you get used
you
to
get
it.
used to it.
And then it became a passion because I loved our handlooms and, just supporting the weaving communities. I only ever wore traditional silks, cottons, never really anything that was not traditional. And
Harvard Business School, many years later, did a case study for how high achieving women negotiate their careers.
Yeah.
And they chose 10 women in the world. What advice would you give to people who in today's day, everybody wants to change careers? So how did you negotiate that? What could we learn if we don't want to read the Harvard study?
So I think the first thing is I was in Grindlays. I knew they cherished me. They had given me options and openings outside investment banking as I asked for it. And why did I have to think of a move? I wasn't looking. So that became the tougher decision. And the same thing happened at Morgan Stanley. I wasn't looking for a change.
Right.
So when the option presented itself and I had the conversation, and I had a very supportive husband who was like, what do you lose by finding out? You can say no. So go ahead. I then went to a couple of senior people who I really respected, people like Deepak Parekh, Ishat Hussain, who were right at the top of their game in my field, as in finance, banking, understood what I did because I had worked with them and said, what do you think? I have this offer. I'm really happy where I am. Should I be taking this jump? And the jump from Grindlays to Morgan Stanley was not an easy one. Morgan Stanley, I was their first employee in India. I mean, they could have American firm, in 1991, India could have shut the doors yet again. 2 years later, the bank may have closed. Where was I going to be at that point of time, leaving something that I was really happy in? So should I take that jump or not? And the money was good, but, was it going to be harakiri for my career? And it came with its challenges. So there were big decisions of this order. And the great thing was the guys who I met, senior folks who I went to, and the 3 or 4. And I feel this is a very important aspect of it. My father had passed by then.
Right.
But just getting that input, and they heard me and they would look me in the face and say, what would you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. So they were like, what do you lose by taking this jump? And if very early in the day you find it's not working for you, you'll find something else. So don't get so worried about it. If you feel that it is something you might enjoy doing, you're young, take that choice. And both times I made the jump, I made it nervous. But I think that input one gets from that network outside, people who care about you, people whose opinions matter to you, becomes very important at these stages. So that you're not just overanalyzing the problem for yourself. You're also seeing it through other people's eyes.
Right. You talk about the input that you get from other people, like Mr. Hussain and Mr. Parekh, great people, both of them. So what strikes me is that You have really been someone who's able to cultivate incredible relationships. How did you do that from early in your career till today?
Yeah.
Have such amazing networks with everyone as a woman in a man's world.
Yeah. So don't forget my work, being investment banking primarily, required it
Right.
to some extent, because you go, you get business, you work with different customers, and in any one year you may have worked for 10-15 different companies for things that really matter to them, their listing on a stock market,
Right.
their fundraising, their sort of vision of what they're trying to do. So in itself, I clearly was quite comfortable in a corporate setup. I think a little mix on the social side, and I had a husband who was very social himself with terrific friendships, much deeper friendships than I ever struck. That was also hugely helpful for me, and hugely supportive of me too, because even if he felt it was going to be the most boring banker do, if I asked him to be there for me, he was there. And he came and always reminded me that he had done it. Of course, that was a negotiation in itself.
And he was
But
very
there.
gregarious, friendly person.
And, created relationships very easily for himself and for us. So that helped enormously. But I think in my case, also a desire to be taken seriously in my field. So quite early getting involved with the Chambers of Commerce. So I sat on the CII National Executive Committee, on the FICCI National Executive Committee, and ASSOCHAM. I involved myself in all three, and they embraced me, to be fair. And then at FICCI, I actually set up a capital markets committee. I was like, why do we not have a committee for capital markets? And the then Secretary General, Amit Mitra, was like, I think it's a great idea. Just go ahead, set it up. So I created that, and that network was very valuable. In fact, it became valuable because it was a platform which we used, not just at FICCI, but I would like to say the country used in order to talk across the industry. So it wasn't just banking, it was insurance, asset management, in terms of what the next steps are. So some of the things that arose from there, for example, was the insider trading policy for the country. SEBI was still not established. G.V. Ramakrishna had been asked to set up SEBI. And he turned to us at the FICCI Capital Markets Committee saying, look, you're the only forum I know who could help. Can you look at this insider trading policy that has been drafted by the government? And is it the right place? And he gave us an extension of almost a month so I pulled in lawyers, etc., to look at the policies at the time as practitioners. And it was not easy because different people had different views from different sides of the industry, which we then vetted and put back to him there. So getting engaged in some of that building that was happening. Similarly, at the time when we just couldn't get the Bombay Stock Exchange to change the way it was working. And I was in foreign firms where I was exposed to what was happening elsewhere in the world. How do listings happen abroad? How do stock exchanges behave abroad? And we ended up as a group with Nimesh Kampani, Hemendra Kothari, all names, Uday Kotak, myself as the foreign sort of participant in that group.
The four gurus.
Well, they're all Ks actually, but it's more me as an add-on, where we looked at the way...
Oh, wow, the 4Ks.
Yeah.
4K, I like that.
Yeah. And
Ultra HD 4K.
For a while that got said. But why not set up a new exchange if we cannot get the Bombay Stock Exchange to change? And the three of them had vested interest in the Bombay Stock Exchange. Don't forget, I didn't have a vested interest. I didn't have a broking license or anything there. But they did. And so then we went ahead with the conceptualizing of the NSE, which came up, and you know what its strength it is today and how critical it was.
You got some shares.
No.
That you've held on to.
I don't invest in individual shares because it creates too many conflicts in my work.
You can't,
But yeah, I wish I had.
There goes $1 billion.
I wish I had. Yeah, really. And then likewise, the whole area of getting shares dematted.
Right.
At Grindays, we had huge walls full of shares. And in a pretty organized way, but I'm not sure whether this concept of duplicate certificates was
Right.
ever properly possible. And the fakes that were going around in the market, it was very scary.
So you were responsible for the dematting of shares.
No, just to identify it needed to happen.
Right.
Because
In
by
which
the
committee
time the
was this?
country decided, the Capital Markets
The
Committee
Capital
of
Markets
FICCI, and also from my work
Right.
at the bank, because I could see the problems
Amazing.
that we were facing. That insight was huge. And the insights also came because your offshore office would be saying, what the hell?
Right.
This is crazy. And in India, we took too long to demat shares because the
I
shares had
remember.
become so huge
Yes.
that the whole issue of dematting was
The physicality was
huge.
yeah.
And so everyone kept deferring the decision
Right.
because it looks so much of a problem to solve.
Got it. You wrote several books, and one of them talks about your pregnancy.
Huh.
And I have some quotes from your pregnancy, and
Oh,
I just want
really?
to talk about
Oh my
that.
gosh.
Yeah, in relation to your career.
Yeah.
You say just the day before the bank CEO called to offer you the job, you realized you were pregnant.
Yeah.
And then after that, you say, I have to say, I've never worked harder in my life. The faith the organization had placed in me propelled me to attend
Yeah.
every matter, even from my hospital bed.
Yeah.
Now, these
It's
are
true.
things that you're talking about during your pregnancy as a career woman.
Yeah.
It sounds like an insane amount of pressure for someone.
Yeah.
So, how did you manage to balance this out at that period?
Well, full support of family, husband firmly behind me. So imagine I'm offered a job which I've asked for. I've said I've done this investment banking thing. I don't want to do corporate banking, which is what they thought I'd be a natural for, because I've done it. Investment banking is very similar client base. If I want to be CEO of the bank someday, I should do retail banking, because otherwise you'll tell me I haven't done that. So I'm putting my hand up to do retail banking, which meant managing branches, etc. And the bank, then for 4 or 5 months, I heard nothing. So I presumed that this was not something they were going to be able to easily tackle. And then I get this offer where they asked me to set up the non-resident Indian banking operations for the bank. And as you pointed out, literally the day before, only my parents and husband knew that I was pregnant. First time, haven't a clue what it's going to be like. And I'm being offered this break, which I had asked for and didn't believe that the bank was going to be able to do. And this is an Australian guy, head of ANZ
Bob.
at the time. Yeah. And so Bob Edgar calls me in and makes this offer. So when it was his turn to fall off the chair, because when I went back to tell him that, hey, I think I want to do the job, but you should know I'm pregnant and you're the fourth person in the family to know that. He went into silence for like 5 minutes and then made this turn back to me and said, what would you like to do? And when I said I'd like to take the job, that faith was really serious. It was a real leap of faith on his part
Right.
to do it. So I really believed I had to show him that faith was well placed. In terms of balance, I don't know. Now, if I'd been sick, I was actually very well through the whole thing.
How old were you then, if I may ask?
So I was early 30s.
Got
I had my daughter at 32, 33.
And were you trying to means you knew you were going to get pregnant, or was it a complete surprise?
Yeah, no. I mean, I knew I wanted to have a kid.
Got it.
It
was in the pipeline.
Yeah, so I don't think I'd be stressed if I didn't, but I think I did want one.
But the job you thought was a long shot.
This job,
Yes.
which entailed travel, opening offices in Dubai, in New York, in London, teams sitting all over the world, not only India, but all over the world.
Wow.
And that's the job I'm getting when I don't have a clue what being pregnant is about, right?
But when you applied for it, did you think...
No, I didn't apply. They created the job.
Oh, they created the job.
Yeah. I had gone and said I wanted a job in retail banking.
Got it.
I thought they would give me, head of Western India, North India, some branch
They
somewhere.
give you NRI.
They created a role which was for me, thinking my investment banking sort of mindset, my global sort of outlook was going to help. Yeah.
So they wanted to tap into the global Indian through
correct.
you because they thought you were the right person.
And that I could set it up. So it meant recruiting people, setting up offices, all within banks' branches.
So perfect storm, basically.
Yeah. And I was sort of in my 8th month, when my boss, who was the head of retail banking, also Australian, put a stop to my travelings because he had to come down a chute because they had a mishap on a flight.
Oh.
And he said the whole time, and I was coming down the chute with my shoes, I was thinking, thank God it's me and not Naina. So he promptly came to the office and said, enough, no travel.
Right.
So put a stop to it. Yeah, but they were wonderful with me.
So till 8 months, you were traveling all over the world.
Yeah. I had to. And through thick and thin, and yes.
Like all continents.
Yeah. And it worked out. It was also a terrific stop for me, because as in a role, because soon after that, the Kuwait war happened. And NRIs began to send money back to India in droves because it was sort of a safe haven vis-a-vis the Middle East. And we went from 15% of our deposits in Grendays being NRIs to over 50%.
Wow.
And all because we had the systems and the structure in place
that you had set up.
So I was just so lucky. I mean, I was seen as a hero, but really it was the bank that had set all this up, timed it right, and we were at the space where we could do it.
So 8 months traveling like a beast. Your boss, has this crazy situation which everybody in the plane hears about, but nobody wants to do, where the plane has those great plastic plastic slides open and you slide down and he thinks, I don't want Naina to do this.
Yeah.
Naina stops traveling 1 month before. Otherwise, Naina would have traveled 1 month before also. And then you deliver your baby.
Yeah.
What happens then?
So now 3 months maternity leave, and I'm working. I was luckily working even from the hospital the 3 days I was there.
Working from the hospital?
Yeah.
Phone calls?
Yeah.
Phone calls?
People were very reluctant to disturb me, but the fact is when the calls came, they were because they needed some solution.
Yes.
And then I worked right through the time at home, cut short my maternity leave to about 2 months and a week, and was back at work through that. Very lucky because of the whole superstructure I had at home.
Yes.
And I always say this to working women, that you just have to be nice to anybody and everybody who can help.
Yes.
Mother-in-law, that institution is the most important. But if your mother-in-law is with you, that solves for a lot.
Right.
In fact, the book I put together, people like Zia and others were just like, they traipsed off to work because their mother-in-laws lived with them.
Yes.
And as can often happen if your mother's widowed, she's with her son's family, and the benefit they had. My mother-in-law came down from Delhi at very short notice because she just loved my daughter, and the fact that we wanted her, she would come much quicker than my mother did, I have to say.
I see.
So she was there. The old maid who had brought me up, and the one who had brought my husband up, who was still with the family, 35 years with the family, they were with me. And their role was not to work, but just to supervise, to make sure. So I was very comfortable with the backup and support I had, thankfully, and a husband who was very much there. But there were times both of us traveled.
So it's very interesting you said that.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. Be nice to everyone who you think can help. So how do you manage to be nice to people and do that, so you can, because that support system, you have to have that support system. Otherwise, how can you work?
And it comes in the most unique ways. So I would get a call from one of the senior people in the bank, like my boss's level, wife would call me and say, do you know what your maid is doing right now? That she's busy chatting with the other maids and your daughter's off on a swing on her own.
Right.
So I had people who I wasn't expecting were looking out for me, being in a bank building. And I was like, thank you for letting me know. Please keep an eye. So I would get that call almost every other day.
Right.
And the maid knew that there was eyes in the building that were looking out. So you could have reacted saying, hey, it's none of your business, or why are you complaining, or whatever. But these were the nice things people do if you ask them. And it was the same through my book, because people like Arundhati at SBI would say how she would leave her kid with her neighbor, also a State Bank of India colleague, when she would go to work if her maid didn't show up. I had Aruna Jayanti, who was at Stanford, saying her professor had babysat her kid when she was in a jam. So I think women who've succeeded learn very quickly that there are people around who can help you, provided you, of course, return the favor, but you also extend a hand to them.
Just one last thing about the family thing. When your husband was dealing with lung cancer,
Yeah.
you had all these responsibilities,
Yeah.
being on boards. How did you balance that? How did you manage that?
So I first learned about his lung cancer when I was at HSBC. And I remember I was doing a town hall, standing in the branch on stage, and proceedings going on as happens with town hall. And I got a message to say there was a call which I needed to take. And I went off the stage with Rashid saying that the test results had come and it was lung cancer. Yeah. And I can still remember how I just felt the blood draining from my system. I didn't know how I made it back on stage because I was like feeling giddy and it was like going through the process of that whole town hall without really. I was like hearing myself from outside. It was a very weird feeling. That was probably one of the most trying hours I've ever spent. So yes, he had lung cancer through the time when I was CEO of the bank, and we weathered that. We were really lucky that we lived right across from the hospital, so it couldn't have been better from Breach Candy. So it was literally just to walk across, and he had chemotherapy. And I couldn't be there for him, with him all the time, but son, daughter, his mom, everyone stepped in to help. And he went through it like a real trooper. The doctors loved him because he was so cheerful through it all. And he conquered it. And that lung cancer never returned.
Yeah.
Whereas lung cancer can and does.
Yes.
So he had a good 12 years till he finally passed without the lung cancer returning. But we lived with that fear every checkup. As anyone will tell you, when you, for those 2-3 days before the checkup, you're like a nervous wreck because you don't want to hear the bad news. And you're always relieved when you
You're
hear
on
that
tenterhooks.
on
Yeah, it's a
tenterhooks
continuous
right through.
tenterhooks, right?
Yeah. But he weathered that really well. I went off the smoking, which was the best thing that happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, your father was extremely unwell.
Yeah.
In Delhi.
Yeah.
And you delayed your trip to see him
Yeah.
because of work, I guess. And he passed away.
Yeah.
Before you could see him.
Yeah.
How was that?
So it's one of the biggest regrets in my life. And I was, of course, busy at work, but I also had a 9-month-old baby because Kimaya was born then. So it was juggling.
Oh, Kimaya was 9 months old then?
When he passed, yeah. So it was all of that, managing the home scene, managing the work scene. And Dad had actually come out of the ICU and was in a room. So he was looking like he was better.
Got it.
And but I really should have gone in when we could see him. My mother kept saying, Abali's in the ICU, no point. But now he's in a hospital room.
Right.
I should have gone. And then I was like, I'll just wait till he comes home, which was going to be 3 days hence. Tickets were all booked, etc. And he passed. So I never did get to see him in those last couple of months when I would have really liked to be there with him. But I would speak to him on the phone and he was like, there's no hurry. You don't need to come now. Come on, as you're planning, etc. So it was all the wrong thing. I really feel we should do what we feel in our heart at times like this. It's so important.
So did it change your relationship with ambition and work?
I think it reminded me that there's lots out there that is out of one's control. And there are times when those things get and must get priority. That there's no point regretting. Something I could have been there. I mean, 2 days more in Delhi versus Bombay was not, the bank wasn't going to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So just get your priorities right.
And so just to understand that a little bit more, because, we're talking as I'm getting to know you better today, that how driven you are as a person and how ambitious you are, and you want to work and you want to build these things and all. And there was some, balancing, sacrifices, whatever the right words are. And I think in your book you've spoken about guilt as well.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the guilt that you felt and what you learned from it, and what were the mechanics of that guilt? Like how do you feel that guilt?
So I have to tell you that I think as women, all of us are perennially guilty.
Yes.
So, and it's funny how every woman I speak to, you're guilty, you feel guilty because you're not spending enough time with the family. If you're with the family, you're feeling guilty, you're not spending enough time at work. So as working women, you're just always guilty.
Yeah.
So
you're always wrong. You can never do everything.
So
you have 24
you have to
hours.
first recognize that you've got a guilt feeling,
Yes.
which you should not have.
Right.
But it's very easy for me to say, not easy to do.
Right.
So was I guilty? I always felt guilty because it was all about time. Where whatever you were doing, you had a feeling you should be doing something more somewhere else. So I think once I recognized that there was no winning that one, and I've always described this as the 3 crystal balls that you have. The crystal ball of work, the crystal ball of home, and the third crystal ball is the me ball. And I treated the me ball as a rubber ball, the me ball that enjoys music, that enjoyed going for wildlife, that wanted to spend more time on theater or music, whatever, was the ball that I could let drop. And it was rubber. So it wasn't going to shatter. It would just lie on the ground, bounce around. I could pick it up whenever I had the time. But work and home were the 2 crystal balls, and both had to be kept in the air because otherwise they were going to shatter. So that juggling act is a given. And I want both. I don't want to give up my work, but nor do I want to give up my family. So you just have to juggle to the best of your ability and make sure that those 2 crystal balls stay in the air.
Right.
People have decided this. If Rashid had been unwell and seriously unwell, I don't know if I would have continued. I don't think I could have. So I was lucky that things never reached the point.
You managed to keep the balls
and pure lucky that I didn't have to make those decisions. But I can see how there would be points in people's lives where those decisions become critical. Yes. In which case you take that decision.
This thing you said about guilt. So what is there a solution? Like what can we do going ahead to make women feel less guilty?
I think society and,
So what can we do as society?
Husbands. I mean, first of all, why is it the woman's problem? Why shouldn't it be an equal sharing? Your mother-in-law, if they feel you should be doing differently, why aren't they stepping up to do more? And it's going to become harder and harder because there'll be mothers like me who will be working. And am I going to be there, 24/7? Absolutely not. So those support systems are sadly also dropping away. Can you get reliable help? The way we grew up with staff that was with us for 35, 40 years. So all of that will bring its own pressures. But the guilt is often just society. The expectation of society that you are the mother, you are the first port of call. It is your responsibility. That it's not a shared responsibility.
So the best position to help this is the husband, I guess.
Totally. So I mean, I just say
to
this
take off that pressure.
Every session I hold with women, and I do a lot of them, it's like the choice of your husband is a career decision. Yeah, be sure.
Look at him and look at his whole family and see who's going to help.
And be clear as to if work is important for you, how you're going to be working your way through this. And I'm actually...
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Let's just pause for a moment. Now, some people like quick answers, while some people like to think deeply. If you're in the second group, the secret sauce is made for you. So please hit subscribe. I want to talk more about HSBC. In 2006, you became the CEO of HSBC India, the first woman to head a private bank ever, and the second woman by 4 months to head any bank in India. But what most people don't know is that you proactively engineered your way to become that CEO.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that?
So I made the jump from head of Morgan Stanley investment banking, where I'd been vice chairman in the joint venture, which I had helped establish as JM Morgan Stanley, to HSBC to head up the securities and capital markets business, which at one level was a smaller business than what I was already doing at JM, but with a view to being considered for a role in the bank as CEO. And HSBC obviously couldn't make that commitment, but what they did commit was that my hat would be in the ring. Because what I was now doing was saying, okay, I've been head of JM Morgan Stanley, 500 people, 600 people. But I now want a bigger leadership role, more like heading thousands of people. And how do I make that jump? After all, I've done a banking type role when at Grindlays for about 6 years. So I've proved my laurels there. How do I get back into now not just being limited to investment banking, but to banking? And hence the choice of going to HSBC, who had headhunted me for this role. But I said, I'll join on condition I can be considered for the CEO of the bank someday, which promise, of course, they couldn't make. But they lived up to their promise of putting my hat in the ring. So literally, not even a year and a half into the job of being head of HSBC Securities Capital Markets, they put me through all kinds of tests, which were the internal tests, personality, IQ, whatever. I mean, they had a very elaborate testing system. So I knew that the consideration was there. And lo and behold, even before I thought it would happen, I thought I'd have to be 3 to 4 years on this other side of the business to prove my laurels. They offered me deputy CEO of the bank. And the CEO of the bank at the time was a Scottish guy called Neil Booker, who had obviously decided that he wanted to see this change. And I think he was this sort of unseen mentor. I didn't even know that he was planning and plotting this the way he was. So I moved in as deputy CEO in a role which was almost second nature to me, because the role was to head the corporate bank, which was very natural to me because I knew all the companies and their bosses by now with, 30 years into that area. So the chances of failure were like, zero. And that was my portfolio. So the area I didn't have was the retail banking piece, which wasn't my strength, but I had done it. And I was to be deputy to a very capable CEO. And we were at a very interesting point in HSBC too, where there were a lot of changes happening. So it was quite exciting in that whole change management. And he was a die-hard HSBC guy, 30, 35 years in the bank. So he knew how to work the system, obviously. So he must have been working the systems overnight, because they had not had an Indian head of HSBC. There had been one guy who was a UK passport holder, Parsi guy, who had headed the bank, so of Indian origin, but it had typically been foreigners. So I was an anomaly. They had
You were Indian and you were a woman.
And a woman. They'd never, HSBC had no women heads anywhere in the world.
Right.
So I was going to be a woman head, that too Indian. That too not HSBC careerist.
New join.
Yeah, a new joinee virtually. I mean, a couple of years in the bank. And so lots of tough decisions for them. So the surprise for me was that they decided.
In HSBC, again, you did something that no one had done before, which is you introduced the 5-day work week.
Yeah.
Which then...
Very proud of that.
Amazing. And then every bank in India did the same thing.
Can you imagine that we didn't have it? Our bank abroad had 5-day week, right?
Right.
And it took a diversity initiative that I had worked on now, because I was very keen to introduce more, particularly women, into the bank, but under the sort of diversity and inclusion agenda. So I put my hand up to head it for the region, actually, even while I was CEO of the bank. And I had basically a team that was delivered to me that were all men. My entire top team is men, and I'm like trying to lead a diversity initiative. So I realized, and I'd read a few books, GE had done an experiment, etc., where the whole thing was to get your guys to learn what it takes to be inclusive.
Right.
And so I set up these teams of women largely mid-management women that we did have, each of them reporting to one of these guys. My purpose is more so the guys can learn how the women think. But given each of them a task that in retail banking, what do we need to do better to be more sort of diverse, etc., etc. And one of the teams came back with, why don't we have a 5-day week? And I was like, wow, why don't we have a 5-day week? And so I worked with my superb head of HR.
Narayan Murthy won't be very happy hearing this.
On the 5-day week. No, but the 5-day week didn't mean we worked less hours.
Right.
So all what we did was we tacked on half an hour more to every day of the week.
Got it.
And in fact, I, in my town halls, told everyone, guys, I'm really happy you like this 5-day week, but we are on trial. If our productivity falls, we are going to have to revert to a 6-day week. So you all better make it work. So everybody worked extra hard to make it work. Productivity went up. Our costs came down because we didn't have to keep all our head offices open with air conditioning and lighting and all of that on Saturday. People were happier. We had women applying to us in droves. The top women performers at the MBA schools were wanting to join us.
Because of the 5-day week.
Because we were seen, the 5-day week also signaled that we were sort of part of this diversity effort as well. So that signaled that we were doing the right things. So,
how important do you think that is to have the weekends off for you and for everyone?
I think the unproductive time of travel, when you're sparing 2 to 3 hours of travel time, is giving that back to people. They're still working
for just
those
3-4 hours of extra work that day. It's not the reward ratio.
Because I would like to believe they had tacked on that same work had to be done. It was being done during the week. That's all it did. And it gave them the flexibility of, kids' schools were off on Saturdays as well. So it gives more time with family. I think it was very important because the whole engagement score in the bank went up. We were getting Best Employer of the Year awards. We were getting the best of women in particular applying to women and men, frankly. Even guys were very happy to have 5-day weeks. So it wasn't, I got couple of calls, Reserve Bank of India, other banks saying, what the hell, what are you trying to do? I think there may have been mutterings about it, just a mad woman at the helm trying to be too smart. But finally, everybody followed.
All the banks of India.
Yeah, I mean, the foreign banks were the earlier movers because many of them were on 5-day weeks abroad anyway. But then pretty much all the banks moved to a 5-day week.
And why so do you think in general for corporate India or in the corporate world, 5-day weeks are better than 6-day weeks?
Oh, I certainly think so.
And why do you think that hasn't been followed, in the rest of corporate India?
I think it's more the norm. And see, 5-day weeks just doesn't mean that people don't work weekends. If you have work, you work. If you need to come in, you come in.
You don't have to come in.
Yeah, that's the beauty
no
of it. And you can plan your time in a way that, forget 5-day weeks today, look at the work from home experiment, right? It's working for some. You're giving people flexibility of working from home other than the weekend on the 3rd day or the 4th day. So yeah, people care about these things. And travel is getting worse and worse, whether in whichever city you are.
What did you do during when this 5-day week happened? Because you love working. What did you do on the weekends did you have any free time?
My rule of thumb was I may respond to an email on the weekend only because I've had time to clear it, but I'm not asking you to respond. I'm just clearing my emails.
Right.
Yeah, you feel free to respond as you will. But I was always amazed by how promptly people will respond. So people were looking at their messages. People were working. It's just that they didn't feel they had to be present to do it. I was certainly, I'm sure, a beneficiary of it. It could mean that you get a weekend in Delhi with your parents because you don't have to be in presence in Bombay. So I'm sure that it helped me as well. But it didn't mean that I was working less hours. It just meant that I didn't have to physically be present in the office for those 2 days.
So during the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, 32 of your colleagues were trapped inside the Taj in the Oberoi. Your deputy CEO said you didn't sleep for days.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what happened?
It was the most frightening time. I was way out of my depth. I mean, I'm the CEO of the bank. I've not been trained to take these decisions. I've never been in a scenario like this in my life. And I'm having to take life and death decisions for people. The first thing we did was set up a hotline where we let through our system, and the systems were getting jammed a lot also, let everybody know that if anyone was in trouble anywhere, you could be stuck on some road somewhere. It doesn't necessarily mean you were stuck in the hotels, that here's the hotline that you can call. So at least we can try and help guide, advise, do what we can. So the first thing was setting a hotline, setting up a team around me who knew what they were doing. And we had help from our Hong Kong security team, London security team, people who knew a little more than we did on the ground on what needed to happen. So the first thing was really, how do we address this problem? Then the calls that were coming on the hotline was scary. I hear gunshots. Should I make a run for it? Should I
and this
stay?
is people in the hotel.
In the hotel.
Employees, your colleagues and employees calling you from the hotel phone.
From their hotel phones.
From their hotel phones.
Yeah, either hotel phones or mobiles.
Right.
And they were having real issues. Someone was there.
They were trapped.
Yeah, and they're also worrying because their batteries are running down. There's no electricity. There are very real issues.
Yes.
There's no food.
There's no food.
Except what's in the minibar. Now, and they are asking us these questions. And we're
Should we
like,
leave the room or not?
Not.
Because they're going to be walking up the stairs.
Yeah.
The terrorists were slowly walking up and catching the people and killing them or whatever.
Yeah. And we were also getting cases of people like these 3 guys who had been shepherded by the terrorists, phones taken away, shoes taken away. They're being walked up the Oberoi stairs to the top floor. They were then lined up and shot. Yeah. And
your colleagues.
Now, so the lot that went up, 2 of these colleagues managed to make a run for it. Luckily got out under cover of smoke. And they have confirmed the 3rd guy was still there.
Whoa.
And now we know that they're being taken up. The shooting and all this we learned later, that they're still hostage. And they were shot. And this boy survived because a very prominent lawyer who was killed, body fell on him. And he pretended to play dead, which was great. There were 3 of them like that. And when apparently these terrorists went to the lower floor where they had lined up the women to do the same, these 3 boys wriggled out from under the dead bodies. Can you imagine blood sort of spurting out? I mean, it's like frightening. And made their way up to the next floor where there was a boiler that was leaking. And for 3 days, they were just sipping that water, hiding on that floor, hearing,
For 3 days, they were just sipping what? Wow.
And we had, frankly, this was the guy, he was the last to come out of the hotel. We knew that he had been hostage, and we were really almost sure that he was dead until he emerged. And it's really, he comes out, and then they ask him if he can identify the bodies that had got shot. And I'm like, we can't let this happen. I mean, what state of mind is this poor boy in?
Yes.
But
how old was this boy?
26, 27 from our trading room.
Wow.
And but he said, no, I can, and did. We wanted to whisk him away. He had a bullet wound in his shoulder. So we wanted to...
He was shot?
Yeah. He had grazed, fortunately. But yeah, he had a bullet wound.
Right.
And yeah, frightening. So my only concern was we have to whip him away to the hospital, right? Get this treated. What state of mind is the poor guy in? His sister was fully aware that he was in there, had not told the parents who were away on holiday in Australia. So the parents are now oblivious that their son has had this near-death experience. And when I went to see him in the hospital, he was so calm and collected. It was frightening. But he weathered it all. He was still with the bank. And that's
still with the bank.
Yeah. And what the bank did was phenomenal, because we just supported him with, whatever attention he needed, including therapy. To ensure that he could address it. And he was like, no, I'm fine. But we were like, no, you just need this. You take as much time off as you want. But that was, for me, sitting there, trying to figure out, what are we going to tell the sister? What do we tell the parents? We were getting calls from this lady from the Hong Kong office on should she make her go for it because it's very quiet outside.
So this was a foreigner who was in India. Right?
Many of them were foreigners.
Yes.
And there's smoke coming in from under my door. What should I do? And that's where the importance of the network helps, because I knew the DG of police.
Director General of Police.
Yeah, thanks to just, being CEO, you had to make sure you knew certain
Right.
important. And the relationship was such that he took my call, and in the middle of all this.
In the middle of all
Yeah.
this.
So he took my call for me to ask, I don't know how to decide this.
Right.
It's quiet. She was in the Taj, in fact. Should she make her go for it? So he did a few calls, called back and said, tell her she should not move out of her room. Our teams are now on the 4th floor. They're clearing it floor by floor of terrorists. She should not open the door to anyone. Such important advice. Unless, this will be the code that they will be part of.
He gave a code.
The CRPF.
To tell, which you told her.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason to open the door.
Open the door so that you're not just opening to anyone who's knocking, etc. So, it was like God sent that every one of our people came out in one piece.
All of your people came out.
All came out, including this last youngster who was really frightening.
Right.
But how do you take decisions in a scenario like this when ultimately everybody around you has a view and it's not a consensus? Yeah. Except when you get lucky enough to have a DG of police tell you, then you don't question it. And you take the inputs, but the buck stops with you. You have to take a decision. You have to tell the person that here's what you do. And this is why, because you're having to explain to them. You have families who are getting neurotic out there because they're
What did you tell them?
I mean, all we could do was support them. We kept
You had
them
to speak
informed.
to them?
Oh, yeah.
Yourself?
They expected, They would expect.
So all those families you were speaking
and went to the site. And the engagement with families. You have to be there, sometimes sounding more confident than you are.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a bit of an act also.
Right.
That, look, here's the advice, here's what we're in charge, we're in touch with them. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So it was a nightmare. Nothing that, but you learn the importance of teams. I didn't have to ask my team to be awake, to be around. People just knew they had to be there. They gave of themselves completely, irrespective. And I think there's something to do with the culture of an organization also. Because these weren't necessarily colleagues they knew. They may have been colleagues from anywhere in the world.
Right.
But they just knew that they were expected to help and be there to support.
Amazing. You said like you had a relationship with the Director General of Police and even the Chief Minister, I think.
Yeah.
So you seem to be someone, you're very good, obviously, at nurturing relationships.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about networking, but the secret is, of course, to network without it looking like networking.
Yeah.
To make it non-transactional. Now, you as a woman, like in corporate India, people play, I don't know if they played golf then, everybody plays golf now.
Yeah.
A lot of women have that thing that this is like a boys' club or a men's club.
Yeah.
How do you manage to keep relationships with all these people, these important people that you need at various points?
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
It was a case of, look, if I can't do that, what do I need to do otherwise?
Right.
And for me, that otherwise was belonging to the FICCIs and CIs of the world, that network, being active in the Harvard Business School alumni network, because these were important connections and friends that got established over time through common
So find common
meeting grounds.
Since it's not going to be golf or the bar.
Correct. And I think they were far more meaningful in many ways because they were related to my business. I learned from them without it being in an office environment. And they were people one could call to get that help and support when you needed it.
Any skill or advice that you can impart on how, because you have these common meeting grounds, which is a starting point.
Yeah.
But then to, keep those relationships non-transactional, even though they are kind of sometimes transactional, but for them not to appear that.
I think the only way is it eats into your time. And it's not just your being there, but people will call and ask for help all the time. Help with them, help with their children, even giving advice to kids and all. It takes from very valuable time that you have. But you have to make yourself available for people. Right. And it has to be not on the basis of, I've helped you, now you help me. Mm-hmm. You help. And you never know when it comes back to reward you.
Got it. You've been leading various companies, including a huge bank, So you'll have obviously so much pressure from different stakeholders or powerful people, to do different things. How do you manage to stay ethical in spite of all these pressures?
Yeah. I think ethics is something which is ingrained into your system. And I was very clear that that was not negotiable, and I remain that way. And actually, it's easier than you think. My belief is if you let that drop once, then you're stuck in that forever. If you're known as the person who is not going to pay your tax officer when you're totally above board just to get something done, then hopefully that tax officer tells his other officers that he's not about to get paid. And the good news is, working for foreign banks like HSBC, they all knew that there were things we were not going to do. We were also very clear. I had a lovely property in Worli, which we could have developed and done very well for ourselves as a bank. But it also meant that we were going to have to deal with builders and all kinds of folks which we were way out of our depth on. So we took the decision to just sell it rather than to co-develop and build there. It would have probably been better for us in terms of being able to co-develop and build it. But we knew that what it would take a builder 6 months to do was going to take us 10 years. So why bother? So you made the decisions knowing that you were very straitjacketed in what was acceptable.
From the beginning of your career.
Yeah.
Like I was telling someone about that, about, some people who are known to be corrupt or not corrupt or whatever. And I think we were saying that you don't just become it randomly. Like when you're 55, you're not going to become corrupt randomly.
Yeah.
It's from the beginning of your career. You start opening that little box all the time, and then it becomes a habit pattern. And before you know it, you've done a massive deal.
Absolutely. And I was very lucky. I worked in institutions which never required it. There were always shortcuts available, but we were very clear which shortcut was workable and not within the frameworks in which we operated. By the same token, jobs, you would get lots of calls all the time on jobs. Hey, you're the CEO of a bank. Why can't you get my kid that job? But my answer was always, the one thing I will ensure is that your kid gets a fair hearing. He or she will go through the system, will not be missed. But the decision is going to be that of a committee.
Yes.
And he or she has to make the
Merit.
grade. So it has to be merit, and that cannot change. So let's make sure that you understand that upfront.
So basically have very clear ethical boundaries for yourself from the beginning of your career.
Yeah. And systems and processes and checks and balances. And then they're real. I mean, there is a committee. I'm not deciding whether that kid gets taken in. There is a committee. That kid has to fare well through the interviews, and make it through the process.
Got it. Naina, you're not in a full-time job anymore, but I know for you, full-time, part-time doesn't mean anything. It's all triple full-time for you. But you have a lot of interests.
Yeah.
You care a lot about sustainability massively. Can you tell us about the India Sanitation Coalition?
Yeah. So one of the things, as I was retiring from HSBC in 2015, that I had at the back of my mind was the give back to society. I wanted to be engaged in something which was of a not-for-profit nature. And my husband by that time was full-time working with Seva, supporting Seva. And it was our joint decision that one of us always is in a role where we're giving back. And I continued to engage in Seva with him, through him. So that was clearly an area of interest, because the Seva does wonderful work in terms of women empowerment and livelihood. But I was also very keen on the sustainability agenda, and the Seva part remained, and it's a very active part of my agenda even today. But, and in fact, my books and the royalties there are dedicated to Seva too. But the whole area of sustainability, and I had been representing HSBC in these forums at the World Economic Forum, at Water Week in Stockholm, as the agenda for climate change and water, which HSBC had embarked on. So I learned a lot over the decade in these areas. Not an expert, but learned. I also knew that we were very far from what we needed to do in India, and would hang my head in shame at these global forums when India was talked of in terms of the sanitation mess, etc., and decided this was an area to work in. And so this was my sort of give back agenda, well thought through. I consulted many people, and that's when we set up the India Sanitation Coalition 6 months before the Swachh Bharat mission got announced by Prime Minister Modi. So how lucky were we? I thought I was going to have this huge struggle on policy change, etc. But here it became a national agenda. So the work we did was so fulfilling because we worked very closely at the India Sanitation Coalition with government in terms of their agenda. Initially, behavior change, toilets, then the whole sewage treatment. Started it, under 40% of Indians had access to a toilet. Then, not because of us, but the government's own agenda drove it to 98% access to toilets. But the issue was really also continuing on, are they using the toilet? So you've given subsidies. Yeah, exactly. And why? So we played a key role in helping government also define what that behavior change agenda can look like, why it needs continual refreshing, why just having toilets, and also the way the toilets are getting built. They weren't all following the right agenda. So we were a very important feedback
Can you take us through that a little bit? What was the behavioral change? Why did 98% have access but yet not use it?
So the access came because of subsidies.
Right.
People were being given 12,000 rupees, 8,000 rupees, depending on the state you were in, but were required to put in 10 to 20% of their own money, which was absolutely the right model. So they had a stake in the game. But then they built this beautiful room, which was tiled and looked so good. Working with government was just such a wonderful experience because we had a super secretary in Param Iyer who had come back from the World Bank at the behest of the Prime Minister, was then secretary.
You were the first woman to head FICCI, which is an incredible honor and role in its 86-year history.
Yeah.
You lead delegations and you shape dialogue with our government and other governments as well. Can you take us through what was the tangible impact of this position?
I got elected to head FICCI, and it's sort of a 3-year journey. Vice president, senior vice president. But the year I became president was the year that Nirbhaya happened in Delhi, known all around the world for this hideous rape on a bus of this young
horrific
lady. And so I had delegations coming to India with this vivid thing about how unsafe India is for women. And their first question to me was less about work, more about how is it about being a woman in India? And I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. I mean, look, I have to represent the country.
Yes.
The country is actually in not such a bad place.
Yes.
But seen through the eyes of people
of this
coming here,
incident.
It's horrible. So at FICCI itself, we took on a whole system of what the corporate should do for women, diversity, the entire sexual harassment clauses, adoption, the code. We worked on all that. So we did what we could in a FICCI system. But I also realized that the story needed changing. That's what inspired me to do the book, 30 Women in Power, their vision, their stories, because I felt we needed to get the good stories out. That there were women who were leading organizations, which frankly, even CEOs of companies didn't know who that woman was, or that Facebook, Accenture was headed by a woman, because those women had been so self-effacing. So by doing this book, I put in women, other than banking, where we were better known, in fields where we had CEOs that were women, in order for them to tell their story. And then did panel discussions with all of them, encouraged them to tell their story. Right. So my counter to it was, let me do everything I can to showcase what's also good in India. That everything is not about Nirbhaya, even while we tackle what is going on in terms of the sexual harassment and the lack of legal processes and systems that's happening there. So it was actually a very unfortunate time for the country. But the good news is there were a huge number of delegations that were coming through with prime ministers, French, UK, etc., who came in. And India was seen as a very good destination for foreign direct investment at the time. And there was a lot of engagement this was 2013,
Got it.
in terms of how India itself could and should position itself. So it was actually a very gratifying time. And it was second nature to me in that working with global corporations, being a foreign bank, was what I had done. So playing an ambassadorial role to encourage FDI into India was second nature.
Right.
And it was just great that I could do that at FICCI as well, even while we looked at the domestic making India a better place, particularly the successes we were seeing in the service sector at the time.
And, like your book talks about all these 30 women.
Yeah.
In your journey and today, do you think women have made enough progress in India?
It's amazing how much progress. I mean, if you look around you, even, whether it's the AI summit and the number of women who were CEO, CIO, CTO sitting there is fabulous. So in fields which often you would hear, oh, this is not for women, oh, in banking, you guys have done it. Yeah, that's fine. But the fact is, yeah, now you're seeing it across the board as CEOs of companies. And I think it's beyond this woman-man thing now. The best person rises to that role.
In corporate India, you think?
I believe so. I think women have to still push a little harder, which is wrong. It shouldn't have to be. But those that do navigate that path well, that role is there for them. I would like to believe that once you've proven your mettle, which would happen around mid-career, your trajectory becomes clearer. It's that role up to the mid-career where you do struggle to make it happen. And I've had my daughter tell me that she was in presentations when she was with BCG, the consulting firm, and she's doing the presentation, but the questions are being directed to her colleague who is at her level, as if he is the boss. And how irritating she was finding that. But the colleague was such that he would redirect the question to her, look to her. So made sure that support role was there. But that shouldn't have to happen. The assumption that the guy in the room is the senior is still there, even when you're with a leading consulting firm with probably a biggish company on the other side.
Right?
Yeah. But on the other side, this was more the client's.
No, of course. It wouldn't be BCG. It would be the client.
Some promoter or something. So those biases obviously are still there in the minds of particularly family-owned companies.
Right. From where you sit today, what concerns you most about India's next decade?
I think jobs. I see all this discussion of demographic dividends, which can only come because we have young people to do jobs. But if we don't have jobs, what happens to these aspirations? Does it lead to civil strife out there? How are we going to make sure that every Indian, young Indian, has a job? So it's not just talent at the top. It's not just what those AI jobs are, but it's all the way down the line that at the village level, as is that kid going to be employable, employed, and aspiration fulfilled? So in fact, right now, what worries me is the disconnect between everyone wants to be a computer techie, even at the village level. So they're doing sometimes these nonsense computer courses, which are probably going to all be washed away anyway, because AI will begin to replace what they think they would be doing. So we're skilling them in areas which they think they want to be in, and they're refusing to do the jobs that are available where they could earn a lot more as electricians, as plumbers, as food processing, entrepreneurs.
As physiotherapists.
As well as, you're right, as physiotherapists, where everyone.
It's one of the most AI-proof jobs.
Yeah. So exactly, you need someone there who's actually helping you, with your mobility. So where do we create an aspiration where the person is filling a role which is required by society, rather than creating an aspiration to have a government job, which still remains an aspiration for I don't know why, or to be a computer techie doing some.
That's a very good point, job. Actually. The whole tech thing is over.
Yeah.
In that it exists on a very high level, but it's
Yeah.
very clear in the next 5 years
Yeah.
that
Certain
the
roles.
low level tech thing is gone.
Yeah.
So, which is 90% of the jobs that someone in
Yeah.
India in a smaller town or something will
Exactly.
get or aspire to.
Yeah.
While the jobs that they look down upon,
Yeah.
blue collar is jobs
Yeah.
of electrical engineer,
Yeah.
plumber,
Yeah.
will continue forever.
Absolutely.
So until robotics catches up,
Yeah.
but nobody's looking at that as a thing. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that really has to be fixed.
No, and even now, skilling courses and all are available there, but the kids aren't going for them.
They don't want to do that.
Yeah.
They're like plumber. Who's going to be a plumber?
So they aspire. Whereas if you made out that you're not a plumber, but you are a plumbing company, that you are your own entrepreneur, you're your own boss, does it give
Ideas
a different...
for entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So it gives it a different... We have to fix this problem. Because I think right now we're going to have a lot of frustrated youngsters.
Which is the most dangerous thing
which
for any country.
Is very scary. I think the other thing that worries me is I don't think we can easily become the manufacturing nation we believe we can, because there are just still too many issues on the ground. I think our success in services is huge and is something to continue to be celebrated and needs to be reinvented so that we can take on the whole AI wave. But there are whole areas like tourism, which are very job intensive, which India, as much as I travel here and as much as I've traveled abroad, I'm just struck by the beauty and the diversity of what we can enjoy. But, I've just come back after a week in Orissa, where we were in homestays, very average homestays, in the most beautiful, pristine places anywhere, where anywhere else in the world would have a decent hotel. So where are these opportunities that we can open up jobs for the local people who would then benefit from what tourism could bring? Religious tourism is clearly taken off. But we can go well beyond that in terms of the way we position the country for Indians, let alone foreigners,
domestic
but clearly
tourism,
for foreigners as well.
Got it. So Naina, as we reach the end of this, really I've learned a lot. Fantastic discussion. I want to ask you a couple of...
You can hardly say otherwise.
Yeah, but you're right. But I'm being honest. But yes, who knows the truth? But I know the truth. But yes, so I want to ask you some reflective questions, I would say, more than personal. If you strip away all the titles, the board seats, and you have more than, I don't know, most people I've ever met, what are you most proud about today that nobody knows? And that's not on your CV.
I think I want to be remembered as someone who lived by my values, was fair, was just, and was there for the people that cared, that I cared about when they needed me. And that can be, and is a very large group of colleagues who I've worked with over time, who still stay in touch. And I'm really happy that they feel comfortable to continue to reach out and be around when there are events happening, or indeed when they have a need. And equally for family and for, frankly, anyone whose life I can touch in a way, particularly women, that can help them along the way. Typically with women, it will be around their work environment. But also, I think the women who I've interacted with through Seva and some of the NGOs I've worked with, where the economic empowerment and livelihood creation that happens down at a level which microfinance can help with, etc., are models which are really working for us. And the voice that women have through that economic empowerment is very, very important. So I would certainly like to be remembered for the work I did and do in the women empowerment space, but also for the values that I believe I have embraced.
Amazing. And, over your long and illustrious career, you gain power, you gain wisdom, you gain so many things, you gain wealth, but you also lose some things, maybe more quietly. What did success take away from you that you did not anticipate?
More time with family. Is that a feeling of guilt? I think it's beyond guilt. It's a regret.
Right.
Because I didn't think I would lose my husband when I did. I was in fact beginning to come off some of these duties I'd taken on in consulting, and the NGO, of course, he worked with me, but the other work. And he was gone before I did that. So would I have liked to have done this earlier? In hindsight, yes. So that would be a regret. But is it something that eats me? No. And the good news there is that because I hadn't dropped everything, it gave me a chance to actually cope with the loss in a way that worked for me, because I just threw myself back at work, which was for me the best therapy,
Right.
and which I thrive in. And I work with really bright 30 to 40-year-olds in the world of private equity, investment banking, which keeps me alive and ticking. And it's really fun.
Right. When asked about her career, your daughter Kimaya said, "Definitely not like my mother, because she's always on the phone."
She said that when in the early days, she must have been 6 or 7 years old. Yeah. And
What do you have to say to that?
well, it was like a wake-up call. My husband said, yes, you've heard exactly what you should have heard. I've told you that before. Why are you on the phone so much? And so then I pulled her into the plan, as in, I'm on the phone because I'm waiting to see if I've got the mandate for the Gas Authority of India disinvestment. And it's why it's important for me, why it's important for the country.
Right.
And so she became part of that. Every time the phone call came, was that the call? Have you got this?
Right.
So it actually was a rather smart move on my part, which worked in that case. But yeah, I mean, the kids will follow their own careers as they have. And I hope they make their own mark in whatever they choose to do.
But what you said also is a great example of everybody has a problem with being on the phone,
Yeah.
vis-a-vis the time they spend being present with their kids.
Yeah.
And if you co-opt them into it in a way, rather
that
than
really
saying,
helped.
shut up,
Yeah.
and you say, this is what I'm doing,
Yeah.
they are interested.
Yeah.
If you can explain your work, if you can
Yeah.
articulate what you do.
No, and then we would go celebrate the mandate.
Yeah.
So, we won the mandate. So
Yeah.
look, here's a president. Let's go out and have dinner. And it became a little bit more of a engagement.
And
Yeah.
it's also a kind of sharing what you do.
Yeah.
Because children do want to know what you do. You don't want to say,
Yeah.
maybe you find it boring, one finds it boring, I do
Yeah.
accounts, but actually you have to
Yeah.
make it sound interesting so they're interested in what you do.
And you can. They're fabulous support.
Yes.
I ask the kids now, is there anything you feel I should have done differently? And they're like, thank God you were out of our hair. You'd have driven us mad if you were
Right.
sitting at home, because I would have been as engaged as I am
Right.
at work with
Right.
them. So I think they see it as a plus,
Amazing.
that I was busy otherwise. And now they could tell me. I mean, they tell me lots of things that are
Yeah.
wrong. They could have easily told me, you weren't there for me when you needed to be.
Yeah.
But I was very good about PTAs and being there for the important meetings. And but we were probably amongst the few parents who went in together.
Right.
Husband and I would both go
Right.
for the
PTAs.
parent-teacher meetings, etc. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Naina. It was really fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.